There's an old adage that says that until the lion learns to tell his story, history will always favor the hunter. For many years, the history of Africa has either been overlooked or misrepresented. I mean, even now, we have a case of so many Africans not necessarily understanding their own history and how it has been shaped for the past few decades. In the same vein, there appears to also be a wave of dismissal when it comes to telling the tales of Africans who have made considerable contributions to science and the world as we know it. We all know the notable people: Albert Einstein, Robert Oppenheimer, Stephen Hawking, Marie Curie. The list is endless. However, what if I told you that there was a black man who challenged the conventional understanding of science in our world and who showed that Africa just might be the cradle of humanity after all? The story of Cheikh Anta Diop is one of perseverance and determination to right a wrong and represent your people despite the roadblocks ahead. And today, we'll be shedding light on his life and achievements. Today, one of the most notable learning institutions in Dakar, Senegal, is the Cheikh Anta Diop University. The institute was founded in 1957, and it eventually grew into the University of Dakar. But by 1987, it was renamed the Cheikh Anta Diop University. So, who was the man who was deemed worthy enough to have a full university named after him? Well, that man is Cheikh Anta Diop, a historian, anthropologist, politician, and physicist who many regard as one of the brightest black men the world has ever seen. Born in Tiahitou, Senegal in December 1923, Cheikh Anta Diop was a member of a Muslim Wolof family in Senegal. In the rites of his ancestors, Cheikh was educated in a traditional Islamic school, with his family being part of the Murid Brotherhood, a brotherhood that, according to him, was the only independent Muslim fraternity on the African continent. At the time he was born, Senegal was a country under colonial rule. The country had been passed around for several centuries under different countries, although the French held control of the country around the time Cheikh was born. At an early age, Diop realized the Western teaching and indoctrination tactics that were being used in education at the time. As he believed, the Westerners had embarked on a massive campaign to essentially disregard any form of civilization that existed in Africa. He believed that Western education, as well as the indoctrination of Western religions, had worked as tools used to undermine African identity and make Africans feel inferior to the white man. By 1946, a 23-year-old Cheikh traveled to Paris to further his studies. He had initially enrolled to study higher mathematics at the University of Paris, but he changed his major to philosophy. He eventually gained his first degree in philosophy just 2 years later, then enrolled in the Faculty of Sciences, where he got 2 diplomas in chemistry in 1950. At the University of Paris, Diop's genius began to show. He contributed to several projects, working with names such as Madeleine Rousseau, Gaston Bachelard, Marcel Graillou, and Frédéric Joliot-Curie, the son-in-law of Nobel Prize-winning physicist Marie Curie. The Curie family is known for their impressive contributions to science. Marie was the pioneer of radioactivity, and she won 2 Nobel Prizes. And Frédéric Joliot-Curie also won a Nobel Prize for chemistry in 1935 for his work. So it's safe to say that Diop was in the company of legends. All through the time, Diop expanded his horizons, working on projects across fields ranging from philosophy and history to nuclear physics. According to Diop's account, his education in Paris spanned history, Egyptology, physics, linguistics, anthropology, economics, and sociology. And by 1954, he had become a bona fide believer in the fact that Egypt had indeed been a civilization that was ruled predominantly by black people. In his works, Diop specified the use of the terms black, white, and race, and he even gave operational definitions of the terms. Interestingly, Diop's doctoral thesis, which was titled Nations Négres et Culture, was rejected in 1951 at the University of Paris. Diop asserted that ancient Egypt was a black civilization, and at the time, Egyptologists were united in their belief that this wasn't true. Nevertheless, Diop remained resolute in his beliefs. He published the same thesis as a book in 1955, and 5 years later, he bagged his doctoral degree. It would end up being one of Diop's most groundbreaking works. In the book, he wrote a translation of Albert Einstein's special theory of relativity in his native language, Wolof. Central to Diop's belief was the fact that Egypt had indeed been the center of civilization at some point. Everyone knows the story of ancient Egyptians, but as Diop believed, the ancient Egyptians were indeed black, and the belief that they were white was only a ploy that was spread by colonialists to reinforce the idea that they were superior to the indigenous Africans. When Cheikh Anta Diop was through with his education, he had already become fully immersed in the belief that Africa indeed is the cradle of civilization. And as he settled into his career, he began to dream about a day when Africa would wake up and take its place in the world again. As part of his many contributions to society, Diop helped write an article titled, "When Will We Be Able to Talk About an African Renaissance?" In it, he expressed his views on Africa's future, as well as the need for the continent to once again discover its identity. As Diop believed, this discovery would only be achieved when Africa learns about its past and rebuilds. Diop was counseled to achieve this African Renaissance by learning the history of ancient Egypt, just as the Europeans had rebuilt their society by revisiting the Greek and Roman civilizations. Diop also believed that Africans needed to embrace a deep connection to nature if they were to become culturally and spiritually revived. He was also not particularly a fan of the different divisions that had broken African countries down, whether they were national, linguistic, or tribal. Diop was a firm believer in the fact that many of these differences had been constructed by colonialists to prevent African nations from uniting as one. As he believed, the entire continent needed to look past these differences to become one, brothers and sisters who, according to Diop, would help create a true federation of African states. With his ideas, Diop turned to history with three primary objectives. The first was to replace any harmful beliefs with a true understanding of African culture and identity. As he believed, this would help Africans become prouder of themselves and their heritage and do away with any falsehoods that had been brought about by Western colonialism. Second, Diop hoped to highlight the shared history of all African people to help provide a sense of unity and oneness across the continent. Finally, he sought to rediscover political and economic systems that had been used across the continent, systems that he believed could help lay the groundwork of a true African federation. That said, Diop wasn't all talk. He also backed up much of his hypotheses with facts, which he then plowed back into the community. In collaboration with the French Alternative Energies and Atomic Energy Commission and the Fundamental Institute of Black Africa, Diop founded a radiocarbon dating laboratory, the second of its type in Africa, following the laboratory of Southern Rhodesia in modern-day Zimbabwe. Here, Diop and his associates sought to determine the melanin content of Egyptian mummies that had been excavated. Interestingly, his method would go on to be used by forensic investigators to determine the racial identity of victims who had been severely damaged by abrasion. In 1974, Diop participated in a UNESCO symposium in Cairo, where he presented several of his theories to expert Egyptologists. At the same time, he also wrote these findings in UNESCO's General History of Africa. So as you would imagine, Diop's quest was rather notable. It was a quest to help liberate the African continent and also show that, indeed, there is more to the continent than what most people know about it. However, this isn't to say that everyone saw him in the same light. All through his career, Diop was praised by men such as John Henrik Clarke, who called him one of the greatest historians to emerge in the African world in the 20th century. Helen Tilley, Dawn Y. Curie, and several other names also commended his work, especially noting the fact that he was a unifier who sought what was best for the African continent through unification and togetherness. In 1966, during the celebration for the first Festival of the Black Arts, he was presented with the award for the writer with the most influence on African thought in the 20th century. Diop was especially notable for his ability to blend different fields of study. He took both scientific and humanitarian approaches, offering a holistic view of his research and his beliefs.